a minute to herself. That's wonderful. Tell me about the pokey little puppy. Oh, there we go. Oh, we have Joanna. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you,
Please,
Kelly.
everybody, thank you.
Hello, everyone.
So glad to have you with us, Joanna. This is just we've so enjoyed your film. So I want to start off with a big question. How did this project start? Was it the concept or the issues, or was it these three incredible people that inspired you to make this film?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It started because I had little children and I was reading to them. And I was in that great time of life of rediscovering picture books. I hadn't thought about them in a long time. And I realized that one of the only times in my life where I wasn't on a screen was reading picture books to my children. And we were involved in this really advanced storytelling, both visual and written storytelling in a way that just said something I'd never really thought about before. And I really wanted to know more about these picture book makers.
Well, one of the things, and this is not a question, but a comment, is that as I was watching this film again, just awakening once again to the complexity and the vulnerability and the respect that all of these creators show towards these children. But I also want to compliment you on capturing that and making us really feel that. So thank you.
Thank you.
And so this is a film that, as I understand it, the New York Children's International Film Festival was deemed appropriate for children 10 and up. So I'm curious, how many times have you shown this to children, and what's their response?
So those are one of our favorite audiences, of course. We we've shown it to children quite a few times, and we want to expand that. We really would love to partner with middle schools and elementary schools in the upper grades to involve children in understanding their literature and being curious and being able to ask questions and then read books and think about what goes into making a picture book. And we always say the best outcome of this film is that children see this and want to become picture book makers, that they understand that they are storytellers and can be the next picture book makers. But we've seen pretty young children sit through this film. There's some heavy issues in the film, as you've all just seen. And I think the thing that I've learned the most from Mac and Juji and Christian and the other picture book makers we talk to is how much children can handle. And there's always this feeling of like, oh, is that appropriate for children? But I think if it is placed correctly, they'll take away what they can handle and ask questions about things that they don't understand. So we've had great children's audiences, and they always see something that I don't see, which I think is so interesting to me, because that's kind of the experience I had reading to my own children, is they would point to something on the page that I hadn't quite put together. And there's just so many Easter eggs in children's books.
That's true. That's true. They're so ingenious, um, and yet so simple. It's really yeah, they're lovely things. One of the things we were doing while we were waiting for the connection to come through, we were asking the audience what some of their favorite children's books are, and certainly Goodnight Moon, The Little Engine That Could, Pokey Little Puppy. What were some of the other ones? The Giving Tree, all kinds of.
I wanted to do a piece on the giving tree in the film, and it's such a complicated story. To get into the giving tree, I felt like, oh, that's really almost a film in itself, but there's a lot to that story for sure. There was so much, I think that was one of the biggest challenges we had was, you could so easily, there's so many incredible picture book makers working today, and there's so many classics that we could have gone into, but we really tried to look at what were some of the picture books that we felt like had changed the art form, had really pushed the boundaries.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we've got a question from the audience. Let's wait till you get the, oh, is that mic not on there? There we go.
I was responding to what children's books do I remember what were my favorites? And it was when I was reading to my kids, one of them was Chicka Chicka Boom Boom.
It's a good one. It's a great way to learn language and letters, like in such an ingenious way, with so much sound in that book. I
You
love
must
it.
have had to really immerse yourself into all these.
I learned so much. I always say I learned more about parenting in a lot of ways from working on this film than I had on reading parenting books or listening to parenting podcasts, because picture makers have so much respect for children. And they really understand how little autonomy children have in the world. And I don't think I had ever, that's kind of how I start the film, because that was probably the greatest insight I had making it, was this is a place where children can win in a picture book and can live and engage in the world sometimes the way they wish they could, or you know, sometimes the principal can be a buffoon or something, things are turned upside down and the rules are different. And that really stood out to me. And Where the Wild Things Are always kind of stands out in that way too, of that it was such a big deal because he could have a tantrum, a child, and then have a piece of cake, not just supper, but a piece of cake at the end of the day.
And when you talk about some of the difficult things that these books get into, there's a lot of difficult conversations going on amongst adults. As you have been touring this film, did you encounter any, any friction or any kind of receptions that weren't as welcoming as you had hoped for?
No, that's really interesting. I've been sort of waiting for that in some sense and thinking it might happen. I think one thing we are learning is that a lot of the conversations around challenging the books today are pretty much a small group of people. I think the media makes it feel like it's larger than maybe it is, and that young literature for young people has always been in the crossfire, as we say in the film. But I have not had those moments. And I think the reason I did talk about banning because it became a very big and challenging topic of conversation while we were making the film. But I feel like I just wanted to show why the books themselves matter so much, rather than sort of a movement to quiet them. I think how far they've come, when you really look at how short of a time they've evolved to be where they are today, it's pretty amazing. They've been pretty much out there kind of on the forefront of how society has changed over time.
No, that was a really interesting part of it. I remember um, getting a book from my grandfather's childhood, which was really just about how to make things. It was all about arts and crafts for boys. And that was like his picture, that was his version of a picture book. It really didn't have a story. It was instead about trying to make him useful to
No, and
to
definitely not about imagination, right? Like one of the moments that I love is when Betsy Bird, the librarian who is based in Chicago, was saying, like, you know, imagine that, like thinking about like what a child might like, or imagination. You see things like Caps for Sale and Harold and the Purple Crayon, and just this explosion of creativity that came in when it stopped being about moral instruction, or just, you know, good tools to have.
Well, and of course, I still got some good ideas out of those books. They were fun, but
Yes.
but they didn't have that kind of story to them, you know. And so where have you gone with this film? What's going to happen next for you with this film?
Yeah, we've been in about 23 film festivals at this point, I think. So it's had quite an incredible festival life. And we're now starting to expand out to museums and libraries. And we have a sales agent right now who is looking to find a permanent sort of home for the film. I mean, permanent meaning where it reaches a lot of people all at once, but we will continue to bring it to libraries and schools. We have that on our website if anyone wants to bring it to their town or their school. We like to really try to make that happen and be accommodating. And maybe there's a local author, even if they're not in our film, that they can bring into their school. We're also looking to create some educational materials. We've had some really great screenings in schools through film festivals. We did one in San Francisco, and we created a resource guide, which I think allows our audience, our younger audience, to go and really look at picture books, kind of study them as a unit and think about what it takes to write one. And the other thing I think I learned from this film is it's not easy to write a good picture book. I mean, you kind of think like, oh, 30 pages around or this many words, but it is really difficult to, especially to make one that sticks around like Goodnight Moon. You know, it's pretty impressive.
Well, and those audiences are very, demanding. It was, it is quite brave to read those. We noticed when Mac was reading that first book for the first time. But we know what you're doing next, and it's great to hear that you have an impact campaign and resources. Have you kept in touch with our three makers? Do you know what? Can you update us on what they're doing?
I mean, they are all making a number of books right now. Judy is sort of in research. She takes a while to percolate her idea, so she's working on her next book. As you see, she does a tremendous amount of research before she puts a book out in the world. I was really surprised to see that she was going to the border and how involved her process was. So she's working to figure out what her next book is, and then Mac has probably come out with 4, maybe even 5 books since the film came out. I mean, he is so prolific and has books waiting to come out, and has also a show on Apple TV called Shape Island, which is a Shape series animated. It's so fantastic if you haven't seen it. Stop motion animation like our film. And then Christian released a book with Amanda Gorman that was quite spectacular, that is out right now. And is working on, he keeps saying he's gonna take a break, but he is working on other projects, and he was also learning how to make pots last time I saw him. He did say he was quite prolific when we were watching him, and I think he was sort of taking a little break.
That's marvelous. And please do keep in touch with us. Let us know when your film is going to be available for streaming, so that we can, so that everyone here can share, how to see this wonderful film. And I'm sure you're working on some new projects.
I am working on, I'm actually here in Chicago right now, and I'm going to Milwaukee tomorrow for a shoot. So very different. I'm making a series of animated shorts for public television about opioid addiction. Very different from Story and Pictures by. I've already made one in the series with PBS and Independent Lens. And then I'm actually working on a film about public education and sort of the movement to protect public education.
Oh, well, we need that. We definitely need that. So we'll be staying in touch with you to see how all those things progress, and check in on supporting you along these journeys for these new projects. And
Thanks.
everybody, please, if are there any questions? Just one last chance to see if there's question. Yes. No. No.
Yeah, yes, I actually have 2 questions. Um, I noticed, and I'm not sure what it is, but as far as the makers, I never noticed this about picture books. How often is it that the author and the illustrator are the same person?
Yeah, it's a good question. It varies. I mean, it is quite often. So Sendek wrote and illustrated his own books, but Margaret Weiss Brown did not. So it really depends how you come to it. Christian both authors and illustrates his own books, and just illustrates sometimes. Judy sort of started off as an illustrator, and now she's an author as well. So it really varies, but it is quite common for someone to be an author and an illustrator. One thing that I learned was pretty interesting to me is that when you're first starting out too, if you're an author, the publishing company wants to pick the illustrator for you. They don't actually want you to pick your own illustrator, and they are the go-between. So you're not really talking directly. When you get to the place of Christian or Mac, and they've worked on books together, they might say, I want to work with this illustrator, or they're talking to each other, but oftentimes that's handled through the publishing company.
Does anybody else have any questions? Hold on.
It seems to me when you look at the older books, most of the characters are of the children's characters are little boys, and time has changed in terms of women's role in society. Do you see any changes in that? Because I frankly, I don't. I still see children's books as having far more boy characters than girl characters.
Yeah, that's actually something I really wanted to go into in the film, so I appreciate that. Just the role of women and girls in picture books, what the mother was like, how she was kind of perceived. They actually don't show parents a lot in picture books because, you know, kids can't get in capers if parents are around. So that's pretty interesting, but I do see more female protagonists in picture books. I definitely do. And I think also in a lot of ways, they used to have more animal. I mean, they still, of course, have animal protagonists, but even to deal with some of the harder issues, they would have animal protagonists in picture books, that could be a whole other film, just sort of analyzing that. But I am seeing more female protagonists in picture books than we used to. I think there's still mainly middle class too. Like there's so many things that sort of are an evolution. You know, is it children of color, children who are female protagonists, not male protagonists, are, you know, not middle class protagonists. That's a big thing. When Christian said, I'm making Milo, I'm gonna make him a bigger set, heavier set kid, because we never see that in picture books. I had never thought about that before. That was interesting too. I hope I answered your question.
The body image that was presented as chunky was a boy. I don't know of little girls being presented like that. That's not acceptable.
I have not seen that as a little girl. That's interesting. And oftentimes, like when you go back and look at the Eloise book, the little girl in that book is kind of bossy. So, you know, the protagonist would be kind of shown as a bossy little girl too, which, you know, is interesting. I do think that's probably another film here, but I do think that you're right. That is something that, it took a long time to have little girl protagonists who weren't kind of bossy, you know, or sort of being portrayed in that way, just curious.
Others?
Okay. I just wanted to mention that there was just recently, Vashti Harrison won the Caldecott for Big. So that is about a little girl of color,
Yes.
you know, chunkier.
Others?
Any other questions?
I have my last one.
Okay.
So we started our conversation here while we were waiting about talking about favorite books from our childhoods. And so I'd like to ask, do you have a favorite book from your childhood? And then now do you have a favorite book from this kind of current time of introducing yourself to all these newer children's books?
Oh, that's a good question. Harold and the Purple Crayon was one of my favorites as a kid. I think very visually. I think that's probably why I became a filmmaker, and I just loved the idea of creating those worlds. That, and I was a big Shel Silverstein fan. I read myself, even though they're poetry books, but I read myself those books to sleep as a kid, and I always think that Mac always says, you know, children's books should give you strange dreams. I thought, well, those books definitely gave you strange dreams. And then when I was reading to my own children, when I was thinking about making this film, I don't know that it was a favorite, but Last Stop on Market Street was a book that Christian made with Matt De La Pena. And it's this little boy, CJ, and he's on a bus and he goes to a soup kitchen with his grandma. And that book made me think, I've really never seen sort of city street life, maybe. And it's not that it didn't exist necessarily, but I hadn't seen that in a book. And just the topics were it mainly took place in this bus in LA, and I thought, or in San Francisco. But really it was based in LA, and I hadn't really seen images like that. So that's a favorite of mine because it got me thinking about what led to this change.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Joanna. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you, Joanna, for this beautiful film. All the best of luck as you look for distribution. I know how treacherous that can be. So we're all pulling for you. And we are looking forward to staying in touch with you and seeing what you have up your sleeve next. So thank you again, and we will be in touch. And
Thank
thank
you
you
so
everyone
much,
for coming out.
everyone. Thank you for coming out, and I so appreciated you hosting the film. You are a wonderful, wonderful group to work with, so thank you. Bye, everyone. Happy reading.